Thank you all for coming. I want to share with you, for those old enough to remember, the days back in 1987, to be exact, what these wanted flyers used to look like in policing, not just here in Fairfax County, but regionally and nationally. And Fairfax County Police Department then, as we do occasionally now, rely on sketch artists to speak to our victims and our witnesses and come up with a depiction of our perpetrators. And that was the case for a very vicious abduction and sexual assault that occurred on March 6, 1987. This wanted flyer, this sketch of a perpetrator resulted, and here we are over 35 years later, 3.5 decades later, announcing that justice has been visited upon the perpetrator who committed this vicious crime on a 14-year-old girl. So you're going to hear a story today that the Bureau Chief of the Major Crimes Bureau, Major Ed O'Carroll, will share with you in detail. It's a story of detectives never giving up. It's a story, it's a testament to modern technology, very specifically genetic genealogy research, the latest, greatest iteration of DNA analysis that allows us to solve cases like this. You'll hear that, and you'll hear specifically about William Clark. William Clark is now 59 years old. You'll hear how William Clark, back in 1987, when William Clark was 24 years old, developed a ruse and lured a young girl, then 14 years old, into his care and custody and abducted her and sexually assaulted her. So this is a story about not giving up. It's a story about the commitment of the Fairfax County Police Department to constantly pursue leads, constantly pursue justice. And here we stand in 2022 announcing that a violent, vicious criminal who perpetrated this heinous act on a 14-year-old girl is now in custody, being held on no bond, and finally being held accountable for his crimes 3.5 decades ago. Before we get into the details of the case that Major O'Carroll will share, a reminder that April is, appropriately so, Sexual Assault Awareness Month. That's something that's always important to us throughout the year, but we take note each April, and particularly now that this is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. We've taken an internal step recently where we've moved our domestic violence detectives from the 8 patrol district stations, and we've moved them under the umbrella of the Major Crimes Bureau, because it's so important to recognize domestic violence as a violent crime. Just like sexual assault is a violent crime, and we need to treat those things appropriately. So a few thank yous before I turn it over to Major O'Carroll. Cold Case Detective Nicole Christian. Carol White from she's one of our crime analysts in Cold Case with Fairfax County Police. Retired Detective Dick Klein. Dick Klein was the original detective assigned to this sexual assault case back in 1987. Officer Jesse Sutherland actually collected the evidence, the forensic evidence, back in 1987 that would years and years and years later be examined and ultimately led to the identification and capture of this vicious perpetrator. Our sketch artist, this sketch artist, and I think you'll see that's a modern day photograph of William Clark, and I don't know if we have another picture of William that was taken back in the 90s. It's hard to look, but that'll come up too at some point, or maybe it already did. Okay. So many thanks to Glenn Miller for that sketch many years ago. Cold Case Detective Tiffany Horton, thank you for your relentless pursuit. Victim Advocate Casey Kirkland, Victim Advocate Pamela Kelly, who recently transitioned from the FCPD back in December, but she handed the case off to Victim Services Specialist Kirkland. FCPD's Fugitive Track and Apprehension Team for their great work, getting this guy in handcuffs. Virginia's Department of Forensic Science was a great partner. Marshall University Forensic Science Center, the Department of Motor Vehicles in Virginia. All these folks assisted FCPD detectives in closing this case 3.5 decades later. So there is no end game for people who commit crimes like this in our community. There is no safe place for them. There's no moment where they shouldn't be looking over their shoulders. And with today's technology that's available to law enforcement here and across this country, it gives police departments, victims, their families, their loved ones, opportunities to have some sense of closure for crimes that occurred to them, even if it was many years and decades ago. So I'll turn it over to Major O'Carroll, and then we'll answer a few questions.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate that. You know, a gallon of gas cost 89 cents. President Ronald Reagan delivered his famous speech at the Berlin Wall in West Berlin, and I was a senior in high school back in 1987. But the unspeakable happened here in Fairfax County, Virginia. So here we are, 35 years, 6 weeks, and 3 days away from that heinous crime. From public safety headquarters, the crime that Mr. Clark is ultimately responsible for happened not far from here. But today we're announcing an arrest. I do want to share some facts of the case with you. A young teenager, as the chief mentioned, at 14 years old, was abducted and ultimately sexually assaulted by a stranger. A stranger claiming to be a popular DJ radio host. Clark, the person we arrested, lived in Herndon at the time of the sexual assault. And what he did, he called the victim's mother at her place of work. He told the victim's mother that if she was listening to the radio station, that she would be eligible to win $1,000 and a trip to Hawaii. Now, that was a popular radio trend back in the 80s that generated listeners and was a way to give away prizes. But ultimately, to be eligible for the prizes, the victim's mother provided some home contact information to include her home phone number. Shortly thereafter, the offender, now identified as Clark, called the home and spoke to that young teenage victim. He convinced her to meet at the radio station, which was in the city of Fairfax. The victim arrived at the radio station and was enticed into Clark's vehicle with the promise of prizes. Clark would drive out of Fairfax City and into Fairfax County to a wooded area during this assault, and he did imply he had a firearm. It is there in that wooded area in Fairfax County he would sexually assault our victim. Clark would then drive away. The victim immediately reported the incident, and forensic evidence, as the chief talked about, was collected by our crime scene detectives and preserved over the decades. And during that time, a major crimes detective was assigned the case. So over the course of 3.5 decades, detectives eliminated more than 70 suspects in the time this case was worked by our team. We never gave up. In recent years, new technology has since emerged that relies on DNA evidence and genealogy research. So Clark was identified as a strong person of interest on January 3rd using this new technology. In mid-February, our detectives acquired a DNA sample from Clark, and we sent it to the Virginia Department of Forensic Science. And just a comment, we love our lab people. They work behind the scenes on all of our cases. The DNA sample that we collected matched the DNA evidence collected in 1987. Now at 59, William Clark was arrested on Monday, April 18th, and charged with rape, abduction with the intent to defile, and attempted forcible sodomy. our survivor. I'm sorry you endured this crime so many years ago. Justice and my cold case team, soon to be Sergeant Detective Horton, Detective Christian, Crime Analyst White, never lost hope, never gave up. I'm proud of them, these amazing and dedicated detectives and professionals. But to our survivor, I'm also proud of you. To the former lead detective from 35 plus years ago, as the chief mentioned, Detective Klein, I spoke with him just today. Thank you for believing our victim then, and thank you for believing her now. And thank you for trying so hard over the years to find the offender. And to my victim service specialist team, thank you. Victim specialist, Pam Kelly, Specialist Kirkland, the entire unit, thank you all. Rest assured, our job is far from over. Our amazing victim services team and our detective team will continue to work with our survivor in this case throughout the court process and beyond. So this case happened a long time ago, but there may be more survivors out there. So call us if you have information about this case, or you think years or decades ago you ran into this offender. We want to hear from you. Contact the Fairfax County Police Major Crimes Team at 703-246-7800, option 8. So Clark, who enjoys the presumption of innocence like all our defendants do, does remain held on no bond at the county jail. But to anyone else that has information, it's never too late to come forward and share and report. You will be believed. These crimes have no statute of limitations. So as the chief said, our commitment is to close them and have connections with unsolved sexual assaults to be closed as arrests. So anyone with information about this case or other related cases, contact the Fairfax County Police Department, 703-246-7800. And at this point, the chief and I will take any questions that you may have. Justin?
Where does Mr. Clark live now?
So he currently lives at the jail. We got him there Monday morning, and he'll be there. Court date's July 8th. That's the first preliminary type hearing date. But he did live in Ashburn. He worked in Fairfax County, and that's where the arrest was made.
And was he a suspect at the time of this rape, or was he developed at a later period?
He was developed a few months ago. He was not one of the original, or over the course of the investigation, the 70 some odd people that we eliminated. He was not. This was a true stranger attack and ruse. So he was not on our radar.
Mike, can you speak at all to the genealogy element of this? Because out there, everybody knows the Golden State Killer and how that was done.
Yeah.
Was it a similar situation here, a website, a family member?
Yeah, so the Golden State Killer is really one of the more well-known. It put genealogy on the map in law enforcement and finding offenders. And we have partners that we work with. This was a partnership to get the job done. We've got some in-house genealogy expertise, and I'm looking at my staff and I see some heads moving, but we often rely on partnerships. But it is a process of elimination, and that's when we received information that Clark could be our person of interest. Sometimes in genealogy work, we're a little far removed from the potential source of the DNA. This one, we were spot on. And when we collected that DNA, Department of Forensic Science collected it. It is his DNA. He committed this assault back in 1987. But genealogy is not necessarily new to law enforcement. I think almost every day you can see a police department around the United States, around the world, talking about closing cases using this kind of technology. And we're excited to give to make an arrest in this case and to see this case through prosecution.
Can you say any more on how the genealogy worked, though? Was it a family member you found and then looked more into him? Was it that sort of thing?
So that's how it works. I'm not going to get into particulars of this case. I sometimes say, and I'll say it here, this case is best tried in the courtroom, not in the press room. But that's how cases work. People will have their information in public databases, and we have companies that we partner with to get us in the right direction. But at the end of the day, it's not guesswork, and it's not a third party telling us what to do. We always rely on the scientific evidence. So when my detectives are and they're in the room today, when we collected that DNA from Clark, that's what we're establishing for probable cause to make the arrest.
Is this
Justin.
the first time you've used genetic genealogy to close a case?
So we have previously talked about the Marion murders. If you remember the Marion murders from quite a while ago, it's a double murder, sexual assault double murder case. We use genealogy in that case. We're using it in other cases. This is the first time we're coming to the podium with an arrest. But we're actively looking at other cases. Why? Because like this case, we don't give up.
Can you talk a bit about what types of cases, obviously murders, and now we have sexual assault, are there other types of cases that fall into getting that extra work for genealogy type comparisons?
Yeah, so the two cases you talked about, some of our unsolved homicides and our unsolved sexual assault cases are the two areas. And any case that goes cool, I'm not a fan of cold case, and I might even change the name of the unit at some point, because these cases are actually not cold. They're not our most current cases, but they're absolutely important. So oftentimes we are looking at these cases for solvability. Now, Mr. Clark's DNA, as you heard the chief say, and I went into a little bit more detail, we collected that back in 1987. So if you're tracking police work and you've heard the term CODIS, his DNA has been in CODIS for 35 years. No matches. So we have other cases that are sitting in CODIS awaiting a hit. So we were anxious when we used genealogy to point in this area. And if we ran Mr. Clark's DNA like we did in February, came back as no match, guess what? There's no press conference today. But it was a match. And now we can scientifically say who committed this assault. So we're looking at other cases. That is probably the two primary categories. They are, it's the most heinous crimes that we focus on to get justice.
Did you have any other rapes at the time with a similar MO, since this is a pretty distinctive MO?
Yeah, so I would say there is a similar type case in the late 80s. I'm not saying that Clark is or is not responsible, but we have looked at other cases. That particular case that I'm familiar with, it's very sadly, the victim's deceased. So as we look back on our legacy cases, we'll always do that to look for similarities.
And just to make sure, so he had no connection to this radio station, just was a ruse to get people out there.
Yeah, he had zero connection with the radio industry, the station. He made probably a blind call, and those are my words, not part of the investigation. But he found a victim, and she's now a survivor. And we're taking this case to the courtroom.
And you've spoken to the victim, I take it. Can you talk at all of her reaction to this news so many years later?
Chief, do you want to, or you want me to?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would say, like we do on other cases, the victim now lives out of state. Our detectives went out of state to talk to the victim initially when this case was getting further likelihood that we would have an arrest. So we've been in touch with the victim or survivor along this journey. And even when I talked to retired Detective Klein today. He remembers this case like it was yesterday. He told me details and remembered and would say to me, I absolutely believed her and talked about the case then. Our detectives now are close with the victim and will continue to do that. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I do understand she was pleased with Fairfax County Police Department, pleased with our industry to get Clark in handcuffs. Any other questions?
You guys,
Okay, one more, Johnson.
Did you collect his DNA from a piece of trash, or how was his DNA collected to test?
So I'm not going to get into the particular of our tactics on that sort of thing. Like I said, when we had collected his DNA in the mid-February timeframe, if it wasn't a match, we would have moved on. We did collect it legally, and we'll describe that in the courtroom if this case, when this case goes to court. But it's that we process to get this link. What we did do Monday when he was placed under arrest, we had a search warrant for his DNA, and it was served on him. Thank you all for coming today. I appreciate you following this story and our other newsworthy events. Thank you very much.